Visionaries, Knights of the Magical Light. Yeah, with magical powers they fight and all that sort of good stuff. Visionaries represent what I would call the sort of the end of my Toy Story, if you will, because I think probably the last action figure I bought going to the late 1980s was a Visionary. Can't be absolutely sure, but having looked at the timings of when they were out in the shops, I'm pretty sure it would have been. And it wasn't this guy, but this is what Visionaries looked like. And they were just science fiction-y enough looking for me that I was interested in them still at that point in time. But there were sort of, I was on my way out of my toys, sort of, first life, if you like. But these were really cool, and I really like the holograms. I'm hoping you can see the hologram on his chest there as I'm moving him around. This guy's called Ektar, although the hologram on his chest is not his. And he was actually supposed to be a fox rather than a cheetah. The cheetah is Whittaquick. So we have the Spectral Knights, which is this guy, and we have the Darkling Lords, who are the bad guys. And I'm going to throw up on screen now a picture of the Darkling Lord, who was my last action figure. He was called Sindar. And for the longest time, I thought I still had him. I have turned this place upside down looking for him. I remember his helmet really clearly, I remember his power staff, I remember his weapon, and I can't find him. So he may have gone, because the picture I just showed you was part of a collection of things that I remember taking to a charity shop not long after I met my wife, because she sort of said, no more toys. So my toys went. That included my Space 1999 Eagles and a Batmobile I just discovered when I found his picture. That was one of the pictures as well. But anyway, I digress. So this is a printout. I'm going to be using this as my crib sheet. This I actually wrote for my website, for sfxb.co.uk. If you search up Visionaries and sfxb.co.uk, you will find this page. Because I did, as an adjunct to my Starfleet website, which that is, several pages on animated shows of the 80s as a nostalgia trip for myself and others. And to my surprise, I found that my Visionaries section on there is actually quite detailed. And I think it's detailed because I picked up this. Now, I checked on Amazon to see if this was still a thing or if anyone had sort of re-released it. And I nearly fell over because apparently this is worth like 50 quid, or some people are trying to make it worth 50 quid. So I'm guessing it's out of print. But this is the Visionaries DVD set. Only 13 episodes of cartoon goodness, but 2 discs, as you can see, on a sort of standard sort of flippy over DVD setup. And I think I used this as a reference. It actually includes all the scripts of all the episodes, which is quite a nice little extra to have if you were that interested in the series. So it's got details of all the knights there on the back, but hilariously, the first word on the back is wrong. And it says Earth, post-apocalypse. It's not set on Earth, it's set on Prismos. It's not even vaguely Earth. It's got 3 suns. You can't get it that wrong. But apparently they did, unfortunately. So the rest of it is fine. So this it was quite strange for me because as soon as I started watching it, I thought that's Starscream. And basically loads and loads of 80s Transformers cartoon alumni voice the heroes and the Darkling Lords in this DVD set. Because it was a Hasbro product and it was done by the same animation house that originally did Transformers. So you would be forgiven when you start watching the DVDs for thinking that you're watching some sort of, late 3rd season episode of Transformers where they've gone off Earth and they're sort of, off world and they've met these characters. But other than that, there is no official linkage with Transformers that I'm aware of. But it's quite a clever setup. And I thought I'd tell you a little bit about the setup before I show you some of the other stuff that I've got a bit closer up. Because the premise of the series and the comics, which I will show you, is that the three sons of the planet Prismos, this was 7,000 years ago, I think the timeline is, the three suns have aligned, and as is often the way, the alignment has caused massive disruption to the planet Prismos, but the disruption is unusual in that it's killed off everything that is electrical apart from bioneural, apparently, because not everyone dies instantly, so it's not a sort of complete cessation of electrical activity in people's brains or hearts or anything like that. It's just the stuff stops working. So no computers, no vehicles, none of that good stuff. But what it's replaced by is magic. So all we've got is magic. So a little bit of time passes and society kind of massively restructures out of the ashes of the previous society. And what we're left with is people running around in armoured suits, which are built out of the scraps of the technological age. And it was quite an advanced technological age as well. And that's it. That's all there is. So it goes back to feudal times, basically. So we have a sort of, I think that at one point it's described as a sort of confederacy, and then there's a sort of a more evil alliance who have occasional clashes. And there are lots and lots of knights running around, not all of whom are in this series for very long, but our sort of focus is on a group of knights who pass a test. And that test is set by Merklin. Yes, it does sound a lot like Merlin, because Merklin is a very powerful wizard. And it turns out that he's a very long-lived wizard, and he actually came from the previous magical age, and obviously he's somehow extended his lifespan, and possibly even hoarded some magic somehow. But he is now seen in this new magical age, and he now holds all the cards, because he's got magic. And so, those knights with enough vision, the Visionaries, to meet his challenges and are imbued by him with magical totems that they transform into, magical staffs that they can power up from his pool, which have particular powers but are sort of one use only, then a recharge. And certain knights he also gives the ability to pilot vehicles from the technological age, which are found and scavenged by the Darkling Lords. I haven't watched the episode, but I believe that the Spectral Knights then pinch a couple of the Darkling Lord vehicles so that they've got some. So they all look quite sort of red themed, as if they're evil vehicles, but they're actually run by the good guys. And in fact, Ektar here is one of the Spectral Knights who doesn't have a staff but was able to pilot a vehicle. So I think he actually came with a vehicle rather than coming on a card back. The card backs are quite lovely, actually. I've seen a few examples of them recently. And, the holograms were the gimmick. I mean, we were edging into the console age in the late 1980s. Nintendo and Sega, they were really starting to peak at that sort of point in time. So these guys were doing their best to keep the action figure alive, basically. But the holograms sadly weren't enough to do it. Interestingly, there were 14 characters, 7 and 7, in the cartoon series. 2 of them were women. They did not get turned into action figures. Make of that what you will. But so we had 6 male figures on either side, 4 with staffs, 2 without, and 4 vehicles. And that was it. That was actually the entire Visionaries toy line. So I don't know whether they intended to do more than that and it just fizzled. Or perhaps there was a second wave being planned and it just never surfaced. But I think for whatever reason, it is one of those quite self-contained little series of toys that you could collect relatively easily because there aren't shed loads of them. So it is quite possible to get an entire collection of them relatively straightforwardly. If you're curious and you really know your toys, I understand that these guys are actually Action Force figures, in effect. And when you take the shield off, you can see here there's a screw that holds their sort of upper and lower torsos together, which apparently is different to the way the Action Force did it. But they very cunningly used their shield and the hologram motifs just to sort of block that off so you can't see it. but apparently that is what they're based on. And I've seen them described as being 5-inch figures. Now, I don't know. I wouldn't call them 5-inch. I would call them more like 4. But that being said, I guess it depends how you're standing them up. 4.5-inch maybe, plus a helmet. So maybe a little bit, but you can see they're not really full on 5-inch. Not really. So I don't know. But anyway, apparently I've seen it on some websites. They're called 5-inch. And by way of comparison, that's him up against a Biker Scout figure from another popular, well-known toy line. So I'm going to take you through some of the other bits and bobs I picked up latterly, because obviously hence the video, and you can see what you make of them as a line. But I have to say, what prompted me to make this video was actually picking up one of the vehicles, because I was really impressed by it. So see what you think now. So this was an eBay pickup. And this is the first Visionaries vehicle I have ever owned. I knew of them because they appear in the cartoon, and I'm not actually sure if they were in the comics actually. I don't think the comics got quite that far, but they were in the cartoon definitely. And this is the Lancer cycle, and it does exactly what it says on the tin. It's got a lance, and it's a cycle. So that's exactly what it does. But you have to be quite careful with these, because I saw quite a few on auctions which were lacking these side holograms and the holograms here. There's even a hologram on mine here which I hadn't really realised when I picked it up. It's quite badly faded, but in theory there should be one on the cockpit section there as well. And I'm not even sure that I've got this cockpit the right way round. It looks like it fits the same at either end, but this flicks open. But as you can see, what really surprised me about it was the sheer size of it, because I'd forgotten that the figures were quite so big. So of course, the vehicles have to be a good size, and because these are bigger than Star Wars figures, you can actually fit logically. Whoops, there we go. There goes the canopy. You can actually fit Star Wars figures in here as a matter of logic. Although that said, you might need a little bit more articulation. This was actually his vehicle, although I got them completely separately. You can see though that the holograms, even now, are still going. They just do not want to die, these holograms, it seems, which is great, because they were, a significant selling point. You can see they shift as well. They're actually lenticular. So they're pretty cool. I mean, I know they're not a massively technologically brilliant gimmick as gimmicks go, but I still think it's a nice touch. It's just a sort of novel thing to have, and I think you could have had a lot of fun with those growing up. Even though there were only sort of 4 vehicles, there were ones that were bigger than this, because there were ones that acted as capture chariots and dagger strikes, I think they were called, or strike daggers, one of them was called. And then there was also a capture chariot as well that had sort of 2 flying vehicles that could split off it. So they were impressively designed, and they had really big holograms on them as well, the even sort of bigger ones. So I would have enjoyed having them had I been a little bit younger when these came out, because I wasn't sort of fanatically into things like Dungeons and Dragons, but it would have appealed to me on that basis, in a similar way that the sort of more technological aspects of it would have appealed to me as well, even though they were in the age of magic. But it worked logically for me in that sense. The cheat of it was that Merklin actually retained a lot of control over both the Spectral Knights and the Darkling Lords, because he had the only way to recharge their power staffs. So once their power staffs had been used once, that was it, and it was game over. The other thing that I appreciated, and you would appreciate as a small person, here I'm going to revert back to my my SFXB crib sheet, is that they had these little sayings that they had to say to get their staffs to work. So for Leoric, the Spectral Knight's leader, you had to say, "Whispered secrets of a shattered age, I summon you, renew this sage." And his staff gave him wisdom. So basically various of them got given staffs based on their sort of aptitudes. And Leoric turned into a lion, because he was brave and noble and all that sort of good stuff. This is Merklin here. Classic Merlin sort of thing, and that's the rather nice sort of logo that they got for themselves. I mean, it was all very well thought out. That's the DVD cover there, a little bit closer up. It was it was well thought through. I think it probably would have got a bit formulaic after a while, unless something was going to happen with Merklin. I don't know quite what the overall aim of it would have been long term. But, fair dues, it had 2 female characters who, as I mentioned, mysteriously didn't get their own toys. That I don't understand, but, that's the thing. And I can't see there was any good reason for that. Because, female action figures were not unusual. Now, this I picked up quite recently as well. And again, this is what got me thinking about Visionaries again. Because this annual I never had. But it's quite a nice one. I haven't seen it around terribly often on eBay either. It's unclipped, which I believe is always a nice thing to have. So it's quite a bold interior on it. But unusually for an annual, this has a lot of comic strips in it. And I believe there were 6 issues of Visionaries comics. And I suspect that all of them are in here because, as you can see, it goes on and on. And the other interesting thing is the DVD has this sort of sequence in it. So the origins of both the comics and the DVDs are not miles apart. It's dealt with slightly differently. Merklin isn't in it quite so early in the DVDs, but the overall sort of destruction of the technological age and so on is not, is handled fairly similarly. So here you can see there are various random knights on this page that we don't really get to see again, because it's Leoric and his team who actually sort of triumph, and conveniently they've all got the right sort of chest plate to take the totems. Or in fact, I think almost all of them have. But this sort of sequence kind of sets up who's going to get what totem and why, basically. But you've got some text stories in here as well. Not many people who I recognise in terms of the artists and so on, but you get sort of readouts of various characters there as well. And there's the Sindar, so there's the guy who I showed you a picture of earlier, who I used to have the toy of, but it now seems to have vanished. But it's a really interesting annual because, as I say, it's unusual that you get such a long form story in comic book form in an annual. And these are the two women knights here. It's Galadriel and she said, Virilina. Yes, I thought she was like an evil Lyn anagram at one point, but it's Virilina it's spelt. So yeah, so they turn into fish. One's a shark, one's a dolphin. So that's they've got sort of, so they've got the aquatic special skills, but there are people who turn into sort of hawks and stuff like that as well. So they cover their bases. Visionaries. There's a mini comic inside. So it's interesting because it's classic Marvel Hasbro toy advertising tie-in, but you can see here that it's not it's pretty much exactly the same stuff as was in the annual. And there's Prismos being mentioned correctly rather than Earth. I mean, this is a very, very wrecked version of it, but again, it's a nice little sort of pull out. And if you were a complete sort of Visionaries completist, then that's what you got. And there are offers here for Visionaries videos to be won. Obviously, I got a later DVD that only came out in the sort of 2000s. It was quite a while afterwards, and a sort of a holographic offer as well for various cars and things. I think there. So it was classic sort of 80s advertising tools. In fact, those are all those were the figures you could get. So you see, there are only 8 figures that have the staffs. And I think those are the only ones that you've got on cars. The others you would have to get with the vehicles, and they would then round out the total set. But you couldn't get the girls for whatever reason. So yeah, I say it's a really sort of tail end of the 80s. Things like that was just sort of winding down a touch, but it was still really creative stuff, which I appreciate. I mean, yes, some of it's a bit derivative because Merklin is clearly Merlin, but nevertheless, it's they're a fun little group of characters, and because I wasn't into Action Force at all, I think that was the first time I'd seen characters at that scale that well articulated. Because obviously, if you take this biker scout as an example, this is what I grew up with, and he's got nothing. He has no elbows. He is, built as he is. His head doesn't even move, in fact. And he's got stiff legs, and that's it. So this guy though has, he's got everything. He's got elbows. he's got shoulders, he's got knees, he's got hips. So I mean, you can pose them so much better than you ever could before. And because some of them had staffs, you could stand them up in pretty good positions as well, and you wouldn't lose them. So for me, that was quite a novel thing. I mean, the nearest I'd had to that before was probably the Centurions, but they were on a much bigger scale. So of course, that was probably easier to articulate. He's not going to stand up now that I'm trying to do it. But anyway, you get the idea. He would have done. And he has been sitting quite happily on my shelf with his little hologram gleaming at me. But you see, it is amazingly bright. Even now, and this is getting on for 40 years old, and the hologram is still incredibly bright. So fair dues. With apologies for the jump cut, as my phone once again ran out of storage. But I should apologise to the Biker Scout. His head does in fact move. It's just very, very, very stiff. So he does have slightly more articulation than I had originally claimed, but he can't do it in more than 2 dimensions. He only goes around. He can't go up and down. So I'm afraid he does lose out to the Visionary. But on that bombshell, I will leave you there. Do like and subscribe as ever. And I'm not quite sure what I'm going to show you next, because I'm slowing down a touch, in part due to lack of funds currently. But I'm sure I'll find something else to talk about next time. So I'll see you then. Cheers for now.